selection. And when we think about our crop selection in the garden in the spring, that's what do I want to plant this year? And I think it's a good idea. This is a Venn diagram that I use with the schools. I mentioned that I work with schools that have school gardens. They try to figure out, well, what could we grow in the school garden that would work in the cafeteria? Well, let's start with what we already know we like. So if what you really love are fresh cucumbers or fresh tomatoes, choosing a plant that you like, that you feel a connection with, or that you think is special, might be a good first thing to try seed saving from. Tomatoes, peas, beans are all pretty easy to save seeds from because their flowers are self-pollinating, which we'll get into later. But thinking about what foods can I grow in my garden that already fit with the things I like to cook or the things I like, and are those some seed saving options for you? So that was kind of a real general overview, but you might take a moment now just to think. Throughout this presentation, there will be this word scenario, and it's an invitation to think for a minute about your own case. What would you like to try saving seeds from? What plants appeal to you? And this is going to help you when we get to the Q&A part later, because if you're thinking of a specific plant, that'll help us give you good information about saving seeds from that particular plant. And if you want to put it in the chat, you absolutely can. Share with other people what it is you want to save. It's fun. You can also just think about it. So crop selection is the first thing that you want to think about this time of year when you're planning your garden. And everything that we learn from here on out is going to build on that idea, because selecting your crops based on plant families can help you make the seed saving process a little easier. So what do I mean by plant families? Well, in the Western scientific tradition, there's the system of Linnaeus, that gives us the scientific name, like I'm Homo sapiens. My parrot who's hanging out with me right now is Eratinga solstitialis. A dandelion is Taraxacum officinale. Okay, so there are above that, the families. And you might be surprised at some things that are in the same family. For instance, did you know that tomatoes and potatoes are both in the nightshade family? Did you know that turnips and kale are in the same family? They're brassicas. So knowing your plant families can tell you about, well, if I save kale a certain way, other seeds in that same family may be similar. So kale and cabbage are both in the brassica family, and they are biennials, meaning that it actually takes 2 seasons for them to grow to mature enough to produce flowers and then seeds. So knowing that helps you say, oh, okay, well, if I want to save kale seed, I'm going to have to protect my kale plants over the winter from the deer eating them so that they'll grow in their second year and actually make flowers. Knowing your plant families can also help you read other things in your garden other than seed saving, like diseases and some pests, because plants in the same family can be affected by the same diseases. And sometimes plants in the same family have similar nutrient requirements. So knowing that plant family, you can kind of get to know a lot fast without going through every single individual. Well, what does kale like? What does cabbage like? I know that they're in the same family. Now that rule's not 100% ironclad. There are wide variations in plant families at times, but our main plant families for the vegetables that we are all most familiar with would be the nightshades or solanaceous crops. So tomato, eggplant, potato, and pepper, all in the same family. And when you see them blossom, when you see their flower, I don't know if anyone's ever seen a potato flower, but it looks like a big white tomato flower, right? That's when you start to understand, oh, these two things are in the same family, when you start to see more of their life cycle. So we got that brassica family, It's got broccoli, cabbage, kale, turnip, rutabagas, all those good classic Midwestern crops that I love. Many of them are European, German in origin, whereas most of the solanaceous crops originated in what is today South America or North America. There's your cucurbits. Okay, so that is a hint. It sounds kind of like cucumber. Cucumbers, melons, and squash are all in the same family. Now, if you have something that's both in the same family and of the same species, they can cross-pollinate, okay? And that's going to give you a new, different plant than the one you maybe thought you were saving seeds from. So the cucurbit family is one where when we want to try and save seeds from squash, things do get a little more complicated. Whereas saving things from the nightshade family, the solanaceous family, those tend to be self-pollinated and they're much easier and much less likely to cross with each other. We've got our alliums in the Alliaceae family: onion, chive, garlic, shallot. One of my favorites, the Umbelliferae family: carrot, dill, parsley, cilantro, referring to that flower that they have that looks like an umbrella. I don't know if you guys know this, but Queen Anne's lace is wild carrot. So that is the crop that was domesticated, the wild plant that was domesticated to give us the modern carrot that we know. Queen Anne's lace has white roots, okay? And they're not very sweet, whereas our carrots have orange roots and are very, so you can tell that a lot of breeding took place over time in order to give the carrots those qualities. But it also means that if you want to save seeds from your carrots, and there's Queen Anne's lace, which is in both the same family and same species growing nearby, you may have that cross-pollination thing happening, and you might lose the orange color and the sweetness in your next generation of what you thought were going to be your carrot seeds, but are actually Queen Anne's lace carrot crosses. We've got the Chenopodium family. So beet, Swiss chard, spinach, lamb's quarter, and quinoa are all in this family. Did you know we can grow quinoa in Michigan? This is a grain that you might be familiar with from like health food stores. It's, you know, a superfood. It is a South American domesticated variety of something very similar to lamb's quarter, which is considered a very common weed pest. You know, it's maligned. We pull it out of our gardens. It's incredibly nutritious. But anyway, so yeah, things in that family are all related. And another family that I love to save seeds from because they are so forgiving is the legume family: beans, peas, and fava beans. And I don't know about you gardeners, but I never keep up with harvesting my green beans. They always get away from me. And ever since I started seed saving, it's a happy accident, because now it's not that my green beans got away from me. I'm just saving those ones for seed, right? So that's a fun thing about seed saving too. You can kind of let yourself off the hook. So here's a scenario. Let's say that you wanted to save seeds from carrots. Carrots are biennials. Knowing what you know about plant families and Queen Anne's lace, what should you do in order to keep your carrots from cross-pollinating with your Queen Anne's lace? Any ideas? Ooh, someone says, take off all the Queen Anne's lace flowers. That's an interesting idea. Okay, so we go out and we snip all those off. Well, we're going to learn about who is doing our pollination for us. And I think we'd have to move in a big sphere in order to get all the Queen Anne's lace flowers. But that idea that you can isolate your crop that you want to save from in some way is absolutely right. Someone else suggested maybe a raised bed. A raised bed might be nice because it would make it easier to cover your carrots. So again, the idea is you need to isolate those carrots so that they don't cross with the Queen Anne's lace. Is it easier to eradicate the Queen Anne's lace or to cover your carrots, or even to put a bag, like a paper lunch bag, over the carrot blossoms you know you want to save on the day that they open? You have a few different options. But I love the way that you guys are thinking through this, and you're starting to read your garden using these kind of basic rules. So you're practicing it. So I've been talking a lot about pollination, and that is the magic thing. Okay, that's what takes my plant that's in flower, my tomato that is flowering, and actually gives me the tomato that I want to eat, right? The plants need pollination by one method or another in order to produce fruit. So understanding a little bit about pollination methods can help you as you think through, how do I plan my garden for seed saving? What should I try to cover? Like we talked about with the carrots, what does it not matter because they're self-pollinating, etc. And rather than have you memorize every single one, is it a self-pollination, wind pollination, or insect pollination, I'm just going to show you what to look for on the flowers themselves. So you can just observe your garden for different types of flowers and learn, make kind of deductions about I wonder how this one's pollinated. So crops that are pollinated by the wind have flowers that are hard to see at all. You are looking for the flower and you're like, what flower? I don't even know. Like, what? Like grass. Grass is wind pollinated. What comes to mind when you think of a grass flower? Right? Not much. So other things in the grass family, like corn, are also wind pollinated. Corn's a tricky one to save seeds from because it requires a big population size. Tends to be that if a plant is wind pollinated, you need a large number of individuals in order to save seeds successfully. That's going to be true, and that's going to have enough genetic diversity to continue to produce for you year after year. We'll talk a little bit about why that is later, but just so you know, flowers, plants that are pollinated by wind have flowers that are hard to see at all. They're not very flower-like because they're not trying to appeal to an insect, okay? Insect pollinated plants are showy. They have aromas, they have gorgeous colors, and they often have landing pads for those insects, and you can easily see the sexual parts, if you will, of the flower, the pistils and the stamens. You can see that they're visible to the eye because the insects are doing some of that pollination work when they visit one flower after another. I should put mammals in here somewhere, like bats and birds and other things, but I just thought of it just now. So the last kind of pollination we're going to talk about today is self-pollination. The flowers that are self-pollinated have a sort of chambered look. So if you think about a pea flower, how it has kind of those chambers, by the time the flower opens, the act of pollination has usually occurred. And that means that they're not going to cross with their neighbor because the deed has already been done. So let's look at some pictures here. Here are some examples of wind pollinated crops. Corn, pretty familiar. Does anybody know what this is over here on the right? It's a salad favorite. It's spinach. Okay. So spinach is wind pollinated. It requires a larger population size to save seeds from. And as you can tell, these flowers are not trying to impress anyone. They're really not trying to attract an insect. So what about these flowers? See what I mean by a landing pad? This is a carrot flower. Okay, but it creates that big flat surface that an insect can easily land on and walk around and visit every little flower in there. And you can actually see, I don't know how big your screen is, but you can even see on these tiny flowers that the different flower parts are sticking out. They're there so that the insect interacts with them. This allium flower on the bottom right, This is another big landing pad. It's a big globe that the insect can just walk around on and munch through, check out all the pollen, all the nectar, etc. The lower left here, that is a cucumber flower. And you can see that, again, the parts are exposed. It's real open, it's real showy. They can be pollinated. Many of these plants can be pollinated by wind as well. But my favorite here is this broccoli flower. And you can see all the parts are hanging out. And the flower is actually designed so that this bee can do exactly what it's doing, which is grab onto it and stick its face in there and get at that and move from flower to flower, pollinating. So we can see that when we're looking at our garden, we can tell those insect pollinated plants by their shapes. These plants, when it comes to seed saving, you might want to do some control, like we talked about with that carrot and Queen Anne's lace flower. You might want to isolate, because insects, bees, in order to get an organic honey certification, the beekeeper has to have a signed affidavit from everyone in a 6-mile radius that they do not use pesticides. Bees can travel, and they're only one of the many, many pollinators that we depend on for our food. So they travel far. And it's easier for us to isolate an individual in our garden than it is to try to keep the insects out. So here are 2 examples of self-pollinated plants where the pollen is trapped in a chamber before the flower opens. I mentioned peas, that's what we see on the left. Beautiful pink flower, but you can see how I can't see the flower parts very well. And there does seem to be like a chamber, a container. It's the same on this tomato, where inside of this structure, all of the parts of the flower are contained. And by the time the flower opens, it is usually already been pollinated. Now, some tomatoes will cross, and it is sometimes desirable to get more genetic diversity to intentionally cross in, but that's kind of down the road. We're just talking about reading the garden for what kind of pollination method your favorite plants might use. And I saw someone put into the chat that they were interested, it was either peas or beans and squash. So you've got one self-pollinator there with peas and beans. That's easy. You will have success immediately. And squash is insect pollinated. So there's a little bit more to that and a little bit more to seed saving from squash. And one thing you can do to keep your squash from crossing with other kinds of squash is to just grow one kind of squash. So if you know you like pumpkins and you want to save seeds from pumpkins, don't grow pumpkins and zucchini in the same year, because they're the same and they will cross. Okay. So yeah, that was, I guess, the scenario that I kind of wanted to give you. Before I move into the next section, I want to just pause here. Oh, asparagus, also wind pollinated. For any questions, I noticed a couple of things coming up in the chat and I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Would one of the folks in the room help translate and make sure I haven't missed? Okay, I saw a question about kernels and corn. Did I answer that? Or is someone still wondering?
I think we're still wondering.
Okay. Can we rephrase the question? Are the kernels in the corn the seed? Oh, yes. Yes, exactly. The beans in the can are the seeds of the bean. The peas that you get out of the freezer that are frozen, they're young versions of the seeds. So yes, the kernels of this corn are the seeds of the corn. Did that help?
Okay. So what's the other question, follow-up question I would say is, so how can it be wind pollinated? So what's blowing in the wind?
Aha. Look at that. Let's look at our picture of corn. So, oh dear. On our corn plant in this middle picture, we have the corn flower. This is the male part of the corn plant. And all the dust that you see on it is pollen. and it shakes in the wind. That pollen shakes and it falls down to the picture on the left, which is the female part of the corn flower. And each of these silks, each of those strands is connected to a single kernel. And when the pollen from the top falls onto the silks on the bottom, pollination occurs in a magic moment, and then the corn kernels start to form. So if this is kind of a weird way to say it, but the corn kernels are the fruit of the corn plant. Is that making sense? And what's interesting about corn, if you do try to save seeds from it and you save some from, you have two corn plants growing, one's white and one's purple. When they cross, there will be purple kernels from the purple parent from that pollen, and there would be white kernels from the white parent with the white pollen. Corn's an interesting one, like I said, and there's a great deal written about this, that and we can go deeper, but that's kind of the basics with corn. Is anyone's mind blown? All right.
Yes.
Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about before I shut up and we make some time for questions is that when you hear about the seed saving operations like Seed Savers Exchange in Decorah, Iowa, they have acres and acres. They have fields that are miles apart so that their corn can be isolated from other corn to save pure seed. And you might say to yourself, well, no way am I going to be able to do seed saving if I need acres and acres and plots that are separated by miles, because I don't know about you, but my garden is a couple 4x8 raised beds. I don't have a lot of space. So this next portion is I want to show you about the things that you can do in a small space with small population sizes. So one thing you need to consider is that if you want to save seeds, you need enough frost-free days for that seed to mature fully. On the left, that might be familiar to you. That's my green bean that I let go and forgot about, and it turned into black beans, and the seeds of those beans are what I would save and plant next year. On the right, this baseball bat is not a squash, not a zucchini. That is a cucumber, and it is approaching ripeness. So we eat a lot of plants, a lot of our favorite vegetable plants when they're babies because they're tender and more sweet. And in order to save seeds, you sometimes have to let the crop become more mature. And this big baseball bat of a cucumber would be intolerably bitter and squishy and not nearly as delicious as the cucumber that we're used to eating. So you need enough time to mature your crop in the growing season that you have. You also want to bring a couple things into your soil. Ample trace minerals are important. Soil health in general is, of course, important to plant health, but particularly for seed saving, you want to add selenium. Selenium is not found in the soils in the blue in this map. It is found in the soils in the purple. And the reason your plants need selenium for seed saving is that it is selenium that makes a strong, thick seed coat. Imagine the external outside of a seed is like a suitcase, right? And selenium helps it be a nice hard-sided suitcase that can protect that seed from disease and protect the embryo inside. And selenium is one of the things that's important for that. So adding alfalfa meal to your soil, for me in my raised beds, I just do a little sprinkle every spring, helps to bring that selenium into our areas where it's not naturally found in our soils. We talked about this a little bit with corn, and I want to just point out that if you save seeds from only a couple corn plants from year after year, they're eventually going to shrink and get shorter and shorter. That's called inbreeding depression. Corn likes a big population in order to reproduce true to type. So 200 corn plants or more is how many you'd want, ideally, to save seeds from that corn. Now, when you introduce you can intentionally cross out in order to bring more genetic diversity in, but it's in my 4x8 raised bed. I'm not trying to save corn seed because it would eventually look like the plant on the left and be much smaller, and it wouldn't be the same corn that I was trying to save. So there wouldn't be enough genetic diversity. Maintaining genetic integrity is much easier with self-pollinated plants like peas and tomatoes because they're self-pollinated. I can save seeds from one tomato plant and I get the same tomato next year without the inbreeding depression issues. We already talked about this piece of seed saving in a small space or trying to protect your plants from cross-pollination. You see a couple different methods here. When the plant is flowering, that's when you want to be paying attention to it. I don't need to have my carrots covered at all in the first year of them growing because they don't flower till the second year. That's when I have to cover them. I don't need to worry about my squash flowers getting cross-pollinated until they open. I want to be there for that. You can see in the bottom picture, I think that's maybe millet, but it might be corn that someone has bagged in order to protect it. Finally, when you're gardening for seed saving, even in a small space, you want to make sure that your plants have enough room, again, to get fully mature. So this is kale in its second year, and you can see that it's pretty crowded. It's flowering, which is good. I'm going to save seeds from it. But if I would have planted it a little bit farther apart, each plant would have been a little bit healthier. It's because it would have had a little bit more space to grow up fully into its second year. So in your handout, which was posted in the chat, there is an actual, kind of map for a garden for seed saving. I think it's 5 or so by 10 or 15. And these are all the plants that you could save seeds from in that small space. So you got tomatoes, peas, shallots, nasturtium, basil, dry beans, a couple squash, marigold, lettuce, kale. I don't know if I already said that. I'm going to pause here because we've sort of wrapped up with the reading your garden part. And I wanted to leave some time for questions. There's more that we can talk about, and there's more we can get into, but we wanted to Q&A with you guys. Mike, would you like to unmute? You should answer the first question. I've been talking all this time. You're going to ask a question.
Yes, my question is in the chat.
Would the alfalfa grass I feed our rabbits add selenium if I used it as mulch on the garden bed? You're talking about your rabbits eat the alfalfa, you use the rabbit poop as fertilizer.
Both, there's always grass left over that gets swept up, and it all gets mixed together with rabbit bedding and the poop and everything.
I think that would probably do it. That would probably add some selenium. I know that when animals like horses are grazing in our area, we actually supplement them with selenium because they need that selenium, and they would get it from their grass normally. Our soil doesn't have the selenium, so you have to supplement your horse so that they get the nutrients they need. That leads me to believe that the animal's body would absorb some of that selenium if they needed it. And I don't know about how selenium is digested. So I don't know the answer to that question.
So you're not sure if it would provide selenium to the soil?
I'm not sure if the poop would.
But the grass that it all gets mixed together with alfalfa and timothy.
I think that, the fact that you have some undigested, some, that it's just a good mix. You've got the fertility from the manure, and you've got some selenium, hopefully, in the uneaten stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a question in the chat. I saved seeds from an heirloom tomato, Cherokee Purple. one of the resulting plants made green fruits that never colored up to purple, did it cross-pollinate? Good question. My assumption would be that you actually had I'm going to say this word, and it's not, I mean it only in the genetic sense, that you had a mutant, not like a toxic avenger kind of mutant, not as a result of anything in your environment, but there's genetic diversity, especially within heirloom plants. Cherokee purple's an heirloom, and that plant will occasionally give something random, like a tomato that doesn't go purple. Now, if you were interested in green tomatoes that were green even when ripe, that would be a miracle, right? Because this plant has just offered you something that you find interesting. You could save seeds from that green tomato and see if in the next generation are the tomatoes from those plants in the next generation green or purple. Tomatoes, like I said, are unlikely to cross-pollinate, and if they were, you wouldn't see it in the same generation where the cross-pollination happened. You wouldn't see it until the next generation. There's kind of a lot there to unpack. Is there any follow-up question there, or did that cover it? Oh, looks like follow-up question in the chat. What are the chances of that happening again from the same seed batch? I'd like to share it as a purple tomato. Well, if it was just one individual plant and you planted 3 plants, well, then I guess there's a 1 in 3 chance if the other 2 are purple. But if you planted 10 plants, then it's a 1 in 10 chance. I'm not sure. I would say it's probably unlikely. It is probably more likely that your Cherokee purple tomatoes will be purple in the next generation, or from that same batch of seed, I guess is really the question. Mike, do you have anything to add on that? I know that you, okay. If Ray was here, that would be a Ray question. And we can ask him by email later too, for things that I don't know the answer to.
I have a question from the crowd. On your handout, is it are the dates for our zone here or for zone in Michigan?
I should put that. It's for the Upper Peninsula, specifically for Marquette. We are 5A, sometimes 5B, mostly 5A.
The follow-up is, how do you adjust it for climate change?
Good question. Climate change has us having spring a little earlier, but not predictably so. So in order to adjust for an earlier spring, I would be, if I decided to plant earlier because it just seemed like it was going to go that way that year, I would be ready, because I'm a UP gardener, with my low tunnel, with my plastic, my milk jug cut in half to go set it out over my plants, because it might seem like spring is going to come early, but we still might get a later frost. So adjusting for climate change, there is not yet a equation that I know of that we as home gardeners can do to say, okay, well, we can take the planting dates from 1990 and add 2 days. I don't know what that equation is, and I don't know that it's been determined.
So we're not wizards of the climate yet.
Not yet.
The other question about the handout is, what do you mean by transplant and direct seed?
Oh, okay, really good question. Yes.
Potatoes.
Okay, terminology here. When I direct seed, I take a pea and I place it directly in the ground. I take my pea seed directly in the ground, I'm directly seeding it. When I transplant, I take my pea and I put it in a cup of dirt in the house and I start raising it inside, and then I transplant it outdoors. And that's when I put it in the ground. I wouldn't ever actually transplant a pea because they're pretty cold hardy and they don't like to be transplanted. So some crops that have a long season, like tomatoes, that don't mind being transplanted, I start them inside early, weeks ahead of time, so that when the frost is finally, the threat of frost has passed, when that's gone, then I can take my 6-week-old tomato plant outside and plant it. So that relates back to that question, or that part of reading your garden when you think about how many days do I need for this plant to become mature. Transplanting is a way to kind of get a jump start on the season and get a long season plant, like something that's 110 days, like a watermelon. I'm gonna need to transplant that because I only actually have like 80 frost-free days in the Upper Peninsula. Maybe. Sometimes it's more like 60.
Is the seed potato a potato that has the eyes growing out of it?
Nice. A seed potato is, I think, kind of like a legally defined term. There are farms where they grow potatoes to, for consumers like us or for other farms. You get the potato and it does, yes, it has the eyes growing out of it, but those seed potatoes have been grown under special circumstances so that they're less likely to have the diseases that can get passed from generation to generation through potato, the flesh of the potato. We learned recently some new, by we, I mean, Tina, Mike, and I, we were at an event in Marquette, and we heard a presentation from a potato expert, and she saves potato seeds, meaning she lets her potatoes flower, takes the actual seeds, not the potato, but the seeds from the flower, plants those and grows potatoes that way. And that's how she gets disease-free potatoes. If I guess one quick thing, if you're wondering, I've got these potatoes from the store and they're in my drawer and now they are growing eyes, can I just plant them outside? The answer is sure, why not? It's all an experiment, right? But if you're very concerned about potato diseases, which big potato growers are, you might be introducing disease into your garden. If you're not growing several thousand acres of potatoes or 100 or whatever, it's probably not as big of a deal for you.
Can you buy seed potatoes? I've never seen them in the store in little packets like you get with the other vegetables. So
yeah, they often have to be ordered. We have a collective buying system here. Mike, would you talk a little bit about the potato and onion sale that we do?
Yep.
You're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. As a community group, we hold a probably annually, we have a potato and onion sale. So you can order, we have a person that selects various potato types, and then we order them from someplace. I think it's in Wisconsin. The potatoes are in Wisconsin. I think that the onions come from Texas, seems like. And it's a group buy. And so we charge it's very inexpensive, and it allows us to buy some very high quality potatoes and onion starts. And it's worked out pretty well.
The reason we go in for the group buy is that we get better prices because we can't find this stuff locally either. So if we're going to place an order, then we might as well place it and multiple people benefit and pay the shipping just once. So there are many potato, garlic, onion companies that you can order from. Think of it as no more complicated than ordering from a seed catalog. But when the package arrives, it can't freeze.
So the question is, what kind of seed saving tips do you have for roses, milkweed, and a lot of different fruits?
Aha, this would also be a Ray question. For roses, I can tell you one thing. I think that roses and apples being in the same family, see, I'm using my reading the garden thing. I know roses and apples are in the same family. I think when you try to save rose seeds, you may not ever get the same rose that you planted, right? Or the rose plant that you're familiar with. Roses, historically speaking, are often grafted like apples to put them on hardier rootstock, but also to propagate exactly the same flower using a non-seed related propagation method. So we're not letting the genetic diversity get in here because I think roses, like apples, will produce everything but the parent from their seeds. That is not to say that the next amazing rose might not be hiding in those seeds. You just have to have the adventuresome spirit to say, I guess I'll grow out these rose seeds and just see what I get. Now, I also think of roses as being more likely to be protected in some way by a utility patent or by being a patented variety. That doesn't mean they're genetically modified. It means that the breeder, say it's David Austin, wants to have control over who can sell David Austin roses. And so you may not be able to propagate them legally. Milkweed. Milkweed is an easy one. Collect the pods in the fall when they start to open up and would blow away. There is not an issue of cross-pollination that I know of with milkweed. In order to get the seeds to actually sprout in the spring, they require what's called a period of vernalization. Vernal being, I think, the Latin word for winter. Because they are adapted to this climate, they need to go through a freeze cycle before the seed is like, okay, now I can go, now it's spring. So you need to put them in the freezer or leave them on the back porch, whatever, some area that will freeze so that the seeds experience winter, and that will improve your germination in the spring. Other flowers are on a case-by-case basis, and we found one of our seed library members loves flowers. She keeps all kinds of flower seeds, and whenever we have questions, we just go to Grace. And so for other questions about flowers, we got to find you guys at Grace, someone who does it. She says that many of them are very easy, that they don't cross, and that she is able to just collect them. But I am not a flower expert. Hannah's got a good suggestion in the chat. For cleaning it, you can hold the seed in one hand and the fluff in the other, and separate it out so that when you're trying to save it, you don't have all this fluff hanging out. We didn't talk much about how you store or clean your seeds, and that is its own thing. We didn't talk about dry process saving or wet process saving. Those are different ways of saving seeds. Today, we just talked about reading your garden because it's spring and you're thinking about planting. And I would say that if we ever wanted to do something like this again, I'd be happy to come back and we could talk about what to do in the fall when you actually have the seeds ready or close to ready.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
What about low fruit plants like strawberries and blackberries and currants?
Those are other ones that, when you think about how you buy them, You generally buy the plant in its dormant state. You buy the canes of the raspberries or blackberries. You buy the, I forget what they're called, the little strawberry crowns. That's what they're called. So I don't know that propagating from those from seed is very easy. I did know a farmer who started alpine strawberries, the very tiny ones. They're smaller than a thimble, from seed, and they came up beautifully, and they look good. But strawberries also in the rose family, big open flowers suggest to me that they might be insect pollinated. And so if you were going to try to save seeds from them, might be tough. You might have to start with a protected population or buy seeds, which you might be able to find, and kind of go from there. I'll also say that if you wanted to just try it from the grocery store, many of our vegetables from the store are hybrids, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it represents two different parents combined to make one seed, to make, this generation through natural processes, not GMOs. But that means that saving seeds from those might give you a plant that doesn't look as much like what you originally had. So the strawberry I'm holding today, that's a big, beautiful, if I save seeds from it, the resulting next generation might not look the same because of it being a hybrid. It's hard to know because our plants that we buy at the grocery store, it's all broccoli, right? There are hundreds of varieties of broccoli with names like Blue Wind and Gypsy and all kinds of different stuff, but that's not labeled, right? Those are kind of industry secrets and the things that gardeners, we have our favorite varieties, but it can be hard when you go to the store to know what kind of a thing it is, what variety.
Yes. So what you're saying is there's a lot of information, a lot to go over. That's why Alpena County Library has books you can check out that will go over some of this information, and you can follow up with us and we can find some things to help you with your garden. So, do you have time to take a couple more questions, or?
If you guys aren't tired, I'm good to go. We can continue. And Mike, would you chime in if you got any input? Hey.
Hey, we'll take just a few more questions if you have them. So we have a question about buying produce at the supermarket. What produce could you buy and save seeds from for next year, or are they sterile or?
Good question. Quick story. My dad and my aunt love this one melon. I can't remember what it's called, but they bought the melon at the fruit market at the grocery store, Jack's Fruit Market in Midland. And they saved the seeds from it. And they were so disappointed that it wasn't the same melon that they thought, right? Because it's from that family of insect pollinated cucurbits. They really cross. So your question is, what things could you buy from the store if you wanted to start there? While we're talking about plant propagation, I would say this isn't seed saving, but it's still extremely fun, is to buy mint or basil or green onions, put them in water, and the mint or the basil, if it's fresh enough, will form rootlets. And then you can plant those in a pot. And so you just bought mint once, and now you could have it many more times. The green onions will continue to grow. I think so will celery. So cucumbers are out because they're harvested when they're immature. Tomatoes and peppers are possible because we eat tomatoes and peppers at the same time that their seeds are ripe. A green pepper could be dicey because some green peppers eventually turn red, and that means that that's when they're mature. Same with jalapenos. So I'd say colored peppers and tomatoes are options. but they are also very likely from the store to be shelf-stable hybrids that have been selected because they keep a long time or they travel really well. And sometimes those hybrids do better at those things than some of our heirlooms or our open pollinated plants that have really, exquisite flavor or a beautiful color. Other plants from the grocery store. I've always wanted to try banana or avocado. I've definitely seen people have big success with avocado, but I've never seen an avocado grow on the avocado tree so taking it all the way might be tough.
I have a fun story about avocado. I tried avocado and forgot I planted it and thought it was a weed and pulled it.
Yeah,
Make sure you remember what you're planting.
that actually brings up a really good point, Tina. I'm glad you said this. I always tell myself I'm going to remember what those little seeds in a jar are. I'm not. You must label the seeds you save because you can forget from September to March what it was that was in that container. All right, Mike, you should unmute and say something.
I'm not in a hurry, but earlier this year, I went to the pantry and discovered that the turmeric root that I was forgotten about had started to sprout in a little Ziploc bag. And it was so pathetic to see. It was doing its best to grow. So I pulled it out of the bag and I put it in this little pot and put it in the window. And as you can see, it's doing quite well. So that's my little contribution here.
That is beautiful, Mike. It might work with ginger too, if the ginger was fresh enough.
Yeah.
Huh.
And obviously garlic pods, or what do we call those?
Cloves.
Garlic, what is it?
Cloves.
Cloves, yes. Would probably work the same way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, they would. Especially, your garlic starts to get the green center when you cut it open. That's that garlic trying to grow. So if you wanted, you would plant it, but you actually plant garlic in the fall, not in the spring. So I plant garlic every September, October, and then it is harvested in July.
I really have to know your plants. We have a question in the chat about organics. How are organics different?
Yeah, that question came up while we were talking about hybrids, I think. And if your question is a hybrid plant considered organic? The answer is yes. F1 hybrid plants mean there are two different parent plants. So a cherry tomato that has resistance to wilt and one that's yellow. They cross these two very different parents and you get sun gold, which is an F1 hybrid. F1 refers to the generation. It's the first generation after the cross. Those are completely fine in organic production, and organic seed companies sell hybrids a lot because they have disease resistance or excellent flavor or hybrid vigor. But what organics don't allow is genetic modification that involves taking an organism from one taking salmon, the genes from a fish, salmon, and putting it into a strawberry in order to have cold resistance. So there's natural breeding techniques, including hybridization. Those are considered okay in organic, but genetic modification, taking something from one organism or type of organism and inserting it into another, is not considered okay in organic. And I think that the strawberry fish thing, I don't think that was an urban legend. I think that was an attempt to get a cold resistant strawberry. Another example of a genetically modified seed is most of the corn that's available in this country. And one kind of textbook case is Monsanto's BT, and there's also Roundup Ready. But anyway, BT corn takes the genetic pieces of the genetic code of a bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis, which acts like ground glass in the digestive systems of worms. So what loves corn? Soft-bodied worms. They get in there and they eat all the corn. They're called cornworms. So when they eat the BT corn, they're also eating this bacteria, which is found in soil and which is not harmful to humans, that has a really negative impact on them. So that's a genetically modified organism where that corn has the bacteria's DNA spliced into it in order to keep this crop pest at bay. These are just the examples that I'm sharing to kind of paint the difference between two kinds of tomato with two different parents being bred using a paintbrush versus putting genetic material from one kind of organism into another. There's some great resources on GMOs that MSU has put together that I can share in the chat. And one of the things that we are really careful of in our seed library is to not include any genetically modified seeds. We're pretty unlikely as just consumers to encounter those because very few crops make it through the whole process. It's very expensive to be bred and then legally licensed this way. However, there's more and more, and we don't want that material in our seed library. First off, it's illegal to propagate those seeds. And secondly, that's just not the ethic that is part of the seed library. We aren't looking to own seeds. We are looking to share seeds.
Thank you. On that note, I do want to go over what Alpena County Library has to offer. We just put up our Alpena Seed Library here at Alpena County Library, and patrons can come in and fill out a form and check out 3 different packages of seeds and attempt to save seeds from them. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. We'll just try again next year. So, and we also have a display up with a lot of our gardening and our vegetables and our compost and our resources, books that we have in our nonfiction. So it looks like people are winding down. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Mike, for coming in and talking to us about seed saving. And I would love to do something like this in the fall to go over how to store it and safely save the seeds. So I invite you guys to come back.
I would like that. Would you, Mike? Should we do it?
Sure, sure.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you for having us. We enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who is listening, and good luck reading your garden this year for seed saving. As you learn, it's a years over time process. You accumulate the knowledge. So
yeah, I will add that it's even to those of us that are a little closer to the whole idea of gardening and seed saving, it can very quickly, as some of you might recognize, become overwhelming. So just be patient, and there's plenty of people and resources that will help you out, and you'll be fine.
Can you do one more quick question? from the crowd?
absolutely.
Did you catch that, Abby?
No.
Okay, so the patron saved acorns, and she was doing the cold.
I'm sorry, I have goats on the loose. I have to go.
Okay, bye, Mike. Good
Bye.
luck.
Bye, Mike. But the squirrels got into her acorns. So do you have any tips on how to, she's going to do that again, how to save them from the squirrels?
Okay. I don't know how many acorns you're trying to save, but if they'll fit in a bag and you can put them in the crisper drawer of your refrigerator, that might do it. You can also put them in the freezer. But if you're trying to save a lot, then you might consider hardware cloth. So it's like goat fence or whatever, but it's got really small squares. So you buy it at the hardware store, hardware cloth, and anything that we don't want our, like I'll put it around the roots of plants I'm trying to protect, because even mice can't chew through it. It's metal and it's got a small enough hole that they can't squeeze through it either. So hardware cloth that was maybe 1/2 inch might protect your acorns if you want to do it outside without taking up space in your freezer.
How can you plant the acorns right now if they've been, and not have the squirrels dig them up and eat them with that?
Oh. I don't know. How many acorns can you plant? Can you plant more than the squirrels will eat? It just, that seems like a tough one because they're so designed to dig up acorns. You know, you could start them in a pot and put the hardware cloth around the pot after they've sprouted and become a tree, then plant it, and then the squirrels can't dig them up. I don't know.
That's something to try. Also, can you reintroduce your bird in the back?
Oh, yes. Come here, you. This is Rainbow. She was joining us tonight. She is a big lover of seeds. Some of her favorite foods are seeds, in fact, such as sunflower seeds, peanuts, walnuts. Yeah. She's 22. I've had her whole life, and she is my very good friend.
She's
loud,
beautiful.
though. Thank you. You've got things to say, huh?
What
She
type
doesn't
of
talk.
parrot?
Oh, she's a sun conure. She's saying gimme and gimme kiss. She has kind of baby talk. She wants to sit on my shoulder and she probably wants to go in my shirt and sleep. She nests in my shirt, kind of weird. But you know, I've had her for 22 years and at this point, anything seems normal. I don't know.
You have a bond.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you, Abby, for joining us.
This was so wonderful. Thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And we'll do it again in the fall.
All right, sounds good. Let's go get some rest.
Okay.